Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Thursday morning, still in high risk time slot. Much could happen between Thursday morning and Friday afternoon, as the world is currently constituted. But stuff has happened before today. Yes. We have the release of the hostages in North Korea. We have the primary results from Tuesday. And we have John McCain mixing it up with a new book out, coming out against Gina Haspel for CIA director, telling Trump to not come to his funeral. So even if something happens between now and upload time, I think we got stuff to talk about.
Yeah, no, I think it's a solid show today. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Well, let me start with the primaries because I wrote about that.
Yes.
So I'll be totally self-serving. I
had at Politico, right? Politico magazine.
At Politico magazine. Bad night for crazy. So there a lot of focus on Don Blankenship because there was some internal polling that suggested he was on the rise after his last two advertisements where he goes up against quote-unquote Cocaine Mitch. And
I love that so much.
That the government's to blame for the coal mine tragedy where 29 were killed, and he went to jail for it, but he was trying to say the government did it, not me. And Trump came out saying don't vote for Blankenship because he can't win, and Blankenship said, well, I'm Trumpier than Trump. And you might have thought that it's West Virginia. This is the state that Trump won with the biggest vote share of any state. They are super pissed at the Washington establishment, and they might buy. There's a notion that I cited in the article that Republicans want to vote for the craziest son of the bitch in the race, no matter what.
Yeah,
to give the big.
That was Thomas Massey, right? Who said that?
That's right.
And that was a really interesting quote. That's up there with Selena Zito. The whole. Trump, the media took him literally.
Not seriously.
Not seriously. Like, I think that the craziest son of a bitch is one of the most, one of the best quotes of the year or the last couple of years.
Well, and the full context of Congressman Massey saying that was, he's very libertarian. He was saying, I thought people like me and Rand Paul were winning because of our ideology.
Right.
And now that I see, after Trump, who's not libertarian at all, it's just because we were the craziest son of the bitches in our races, and now they're going to go for it with Trump or whoever. And you could see that with Greg Gianforte winning despite body slamming a reporter. You could see it with when Roy Moore won the primary, he hadn't been accused of sexual misconduct yet, but he was still considered pretty crazy in the overall.
Well, let me say, Bill. My wife's from West Virginia. I went to college in West Virginia. I've known Patrick Morrissey for years. He's been on my podcast. My wife actually worked for him very briefly during this cycle. And based on all of that, if you had asked me a couple days ago, if you'd held a gun to my head and said who's going to win, I would have said Blankenship.
Right.
You know what I mean? It just seemed
because you're in the cultural elite. You think West Virginia's a bunch of rubes. And they would vote for the stupidest guy. That's what everyone in the New York in the Acela corridor did, right?
Okay, so Nathan Gonzalez had a very interesting point, which is West Virginia is one of the few states left where a lot of the Trump voters are registered Democrat and therefore did not vote in the Republican primary.
Right.
I thought that was a very interesting theory, at least.
It's certainly something to take into account. Nevertheless, Republicans have in the past shown a propensity to not do what the elites tell them to do, and there was some indication to point out that was going to manifest in this race. Yet he ends up a weak third. Patrick Morrissey, who ran as a pretty traditional conservative, he was hit by third candidate in the race, Evan Jenkins, for being a carpetbagger from New Jersey. But nevertheless, Morrissey could say, look, I was state AG. I prosecuted the Obama agenda. I stopped cap and trade in the courts. He had that credential, and that seemed to be sufficient. Beyond West Virginia, you have, in Ohio, Democratic primary for governor, Richard Cordray, who was Obama's chief for Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, had the endorsement of Elizabeth Warren, who said he went up against Wall Street. He got Wall Street to give $2 billion to the workers of Ohio in fines and such. It's an even bigger number when you talk about nationwide. But he was up against Dennis Kucinich, who was Bernie before Bernie was cool, running for president in 2004, 2008, was for single payer, hardcore pacifist, and he got the endorsement of Our Revolution, which is the group that Bernie formed in the wake of his presidential bid, although Bernie himself did not endorse Kucinich.
Are you it seems to be a theme here. Are you suggesting that Dennis Kucinich is the crazy on the left, the crazy version of Blankenship?
Some Kucinich fans didn't like my piece because they were suggesting that I was saying his issue set made him crazy, and that's not what I'm saying. Kucinich is crazy because he said he's seen a UFO. He's crazy because he breaks out in song at random points on the campaign trail. And in the winning days of this campaign, he's on Fox News. I mean, he was a Fox News paid contributor. Very rare for a liberal to have that standing. And he has even said some nice things about Trump in that capacity. He goes on Fox. Cordray had raised this in the campaign and attacked Kucinich for being paid by Fox and called him Fox News' house poodle.
Oh, wow.
So the Fox News host shows that clip to Kucinich, asks him, what's your response to that? And Kucinich says, grrr. And nothing else. It hangs in the air with awkward silence for 10 seconds.
I've not seen this video.
Oh, you should. I'll send you the clip. I'm not even done yet. So the host is kind of like rolling her eyes, like, "That's all you're gonna say," and Kucinich just sits there and she goes, "All right. Well, there's also this report that one Democrat said that you not just have baggage, you have funky baggage." Which she didn't fully explain, but it speaks to the fact that some of the things that I mentioned. Also, he has some ties to Assad in Syria. He interviewed Assad for Fox in 2013, kind of a softball interview, and he has criticized any American attempt to get rid of him as being another example of regime change. Which in and of itself is, being anti-regime.
But it's like, it's interesting too, though. It's Tulsi Gabbard, like.
Gabbard endorsed him too in this.
What
race.
What is it with the Bernie socialist?
Well, I wouldn't totally put this on Bernie. I mean, I think this is more distinctly a Kucinich left, Gabbard left view. That
I need to do a deep dive into the distinctions on the intricacies of the left. I'm doing a fellowship at the University of Chicago, and I was engaged in a very long discussion with Tom Perriella about the Stupak Amendment. And it became clear to me that, like, there's stuff happening on the left, like nuances, that I need to do a deep. I think you would totally get it, Bill, but like, it doesn't get the attention because I spent years writing my book about the right, and I know the right a lot better than the left. But I think there's a lot of like interesting things on the left that are not talked about much.
Well, I don't get too far flung from the issue of the primary, but I'll say this much. My personal take is I don't think Bernie prioritizes foreign policy the way Kucinich does. Kucinich is of a strain of the left where pacifism is the touchstone. And look, I don't want to malign pacifists here. I mean, I think a real true pacifist would say, "Screw you, Assad. You are a genocidal butcher." And there are pacifists on the left who are intellectually consistent on that point. And there's some, like Kucinich, who have prioritize America's militarism above all and criticizing that, and go easy on others because they primarily want to complain about what America's role in the world. And Bernie, I think you can go back at Bernie's foreign policy statements, and they're a bit incoherent if you took them all together. Because I just don't think it's really his driving force is economic populism, not foreign policy. So he's a bit all over the map with it. And Kucinich not only has made some excuses for Assad. I mean, he's a little careful, but there are certain points where he's rationalizing too much. He takes money from a Assad sympathizer group to speak at a peace conference, takes $20,000. He amends a ethics filing late in the campaign showing this payment. He gets hit by the Cordray campaign. Kucinich's initial response is say, this is just a civil rights organization. And then only a week later they say, okay, they're too close to the Assad regime, I'm going to give the money back. So that's the kind of thing that prompted this anonymous Democrat to the Huffington Post. He's got funky baggage, sort of not your usual baggage. And the Fox News host...
Funky baggage. So I saw them open for Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Well, so the Fox News host says to Kucinich, you're accused of having this funky baggage, and Kucinich says, well, in the words of the great pop culture philosopher Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk won't give it to you. And again, the host is like, okay. So the Cordray people will send that clip around.
This dude is like existing on a different plane.
I mean, that's what I'm talking about when I say Kucinich is a representative of crazy. I mean, it's not your typical politician thing. And there was a Washington Post profile that suggested Kucinich represents the future of Democratic politics because he's speaking to
Slate,
a desire.
Right?
Well, Slate was after the election. There was before the election. There was a Washington Post, a big profile on Kucinich. It's called "The Vindication of Dennis Kucinich." How his platform is now so dominant in the Democratic Party, and that he speaks to the desire for something ostentatiously different. Now, he is unquestionably ostentatiously different. Then he gets beat by Richard Cordray by 40 points. Now, people thought it was going to be a closer race because there was a little bit of polling that showed it to be closer, but in the end, it wasn't close at all. And you could very easily say, look, it's not about single payer. It's not about the Bernie platform. It's about Kucinich is a little loopy, and I would say that is the main takeaway here is that the voting public in Ohio and West Virginia were saying, look, we might want to shake things up. We would want to change the Democratic Party trajectory. We might want to take on Mitch McConnell, the Republican establishment, but we've really had it up to here with bona fide crazy. We've had it in spades in the past year. Republicans in Alabama are like, okay, Roy Moore, you're a little too much. We're actually go with the Democrat this time around. This might be further example that thinking I'm going to be Trumpier than Trump may not be the way to go going forward. Now, for the Democrats, I think our revolution made a strategic error in casting their lot with Kucinich because now you can say, at minimum, you don't need single payer to win a swing state primary. I mean, some people say to me, well, you're saying single payer is unpopular. That's a whole different discussion. It can be popular and not be necessary. Clearly, I mean, Cordray was not for single payer. He was not for an assault weapons ban, something else that the Kucinich folks tried to make hay of. And keep in mind that the Bernie left was totally cool with Rob Quist being for gun rights in Montana, totally cool with James Thompson being for gun rights in Kansas. Now there are folks trying to play that as evidence of Democratic squishiness. But this is something that folks on the populist left have always been agnostic about in preference to economic issues. So the Kucinich folks tried to make hay of that, and that didn't work. Cordray can run as a relatively typical Democrat with credibility vis-a-vis taking on Wall Street based on his record at CFPB and Warren's endorsement, and he did not need single payer to go that extra mile and be purely Democratic socialist to win in an Ohio primary. If our revolution said we're going to unite with Warren around Cordray, he's showing Democrats they need to take on Wall Street and deprioritize single payer in doing so, they would be in better shape today.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a different kind of crazy. Blankenship, actually a very smart guy, you could tell, but he's the Trump kind of crazy. And Kucinich is a different kind of crazy.
Well, so let me bring us back to the Republicans. So Blankenship loses, but Patrick Morrissey, who he ran an anti-establishment campaign. Now he was attacked for having a lobbyist wife, and so you don't have to argue that he is the outsider candidate here. But his messaging was, "I'm going to take it to Washington." He had an ad where he depicts with CGI a West Virginia mountain floating through the sky and landing on top of the U.S. Capitol. You had Mike Braun in Indiana, who won the Republican Senate primary there by painting his two main opponents, Todd Rokita and Luke Messer, who are incumbent congressmen. He hit them both as Washington creatures, where he was the outsider businessman who creates jobs. And you have in North Carolina, the 9th District, an incumbent congressman loses to Robert Pettinger, I think you pronounce his last name. Forgive me if I get that wrong. Mark Harris, who was a longtime pastor, Baptist pastor, evangelical, steps down just to run for this race, though he's run for other races before. Came close in this district against Pettinger last time round. He rallies the evangelical community of the 9th District. He attacks Pettinger for voting for the omnibus bill, which they extrapolate to say he didn't vote to defund Planned Parenthood. He didn't vote for more funds for a border wall. He's part of the swamp. We got to get rid of him. He wins. So what do you make of the success, the continued success of an anti-establishment message in the Republican Party, but not going so far as let's play to the peanut gallery and try to do crazy viral videos to really stick in the eye of the media establishment? That didn't work for Blankenship, but it worked. But being anti-Semitic with the other folks, what does that tell you about the state of the Republican base?
Well, again, I mean, anytime you're trying to take a snapshot of what's happening today and make extrapolate some large point, it's a little bit fraught with danger. We could have had this conversation right after Republicans nominated Roy Moore, and we might have had a different conversation. But I do think that people have, we've wondered, what happens after Trump? What happens to the party after Trump? And I've long argued that Trump did not cause he exploited a lot of the problems on the right. He did not cause them. And if you're looking at the Tuesday night, I think that you could make an argument that says that Trump is sui generis, that Trumpism isn't transferable, that other candidates, that it works for Trump to behave the way Trump behaves, but other people can't get away with it, and that actually, in terms of what does work, what is transferable, is that you've got a sort of a Ted Cruzization of the party. So, for example, Patrick Morrissey, I believe he really is a conservative, but I think he probably ran more of a Ted Cruz type campaign to win in West Virginia than he would have in a different environment. He might have run more of a Rubio campaign in a different environment. And so, again, I think that the Trumpism, the flamboyance, the craziness, that kind of just works for Trump. But if Trump were to go away, you would still have a party. Maybe you could go back to the kind of Cruz versus Rubio model, which was in itself a pretty major schism.
Well, and I think there's a question here whether is it that Trump is sui generis, he is a unique pop culture figure, and he can get away with things that other people can't get away with, or are we fed up with craziness because of Trump, and that includes Trump, and Trump himself can't get away with what he got away with before next time he's up on the ballot in 2020?
I would, if it's a binary choice, because it may be a mixture, but if I was forced the binary choice, I would go with the former. I think that Donald Trump is very unique. and that he can get away with it. He's been doing it for years. He's a master at this shtick. I do think that there may be that there may only be actually a lower tolerance for it with other people because of Trump. Trump gets away with it, but we're getting all the entertainment and all the crazy we need from Trump. So like, let's balance it out with some more normal people. Yeah.
So let's shift into the Trump-centric news of the week, and I don't think we have too much to say about the Michael Cohen stuff this week, although it is not that I don't want to suggest that's not important. But foreign policy-wise, Trump is simultaneously thawing relations with North Korea and exacerbating relations with Iran. So we talked last week about this piece that I did for Real Clear Politics, actually just posted this past Monday, but I got to preview it for you all last week. Say, look, Trump does deserve some credit for what's happening in North Korea, and this is before the 3 detainees were released late yesterday. But don't think it's because of all the fire and fury nonsense, because North Korea jacked up its nuclear program in response to that. It only came to the table after they said, well, okay, we have nuclear weapons that can reach the United States of America. We now hold that card. We can go into a negotiation with stronger leverage. And at the same time, Trump's the one that keeps teasing that he really wants to get those troops out of South Korea, which is exactly what North Korea wants anyway. So there is a conciliatory element to Trump's relationship with North Korea that he doesn't brag about, but I would argue is probably much more relevant than the narrative that Trump himself wants to say, which is the North Koreans know how tough I am. That's why they're coming to the table now. They saw me trash that Iran deal. Then I won't stand for some terrible deal like that. So now they're going to come talk to me. I mean, I think there's a complete intellectual disconnect in that narrative. I'm sure Trump's fans embrace it. What do you make of Trump operating on these two separate paths simultaneously?
I think that there is some. I mean, it's possible to come to a coherent, sort of strategy. The Iran deal, I think was a bad deal. I understand the argument for doing it, but it doesn't touch, ballistic missiles. It doesn't curb state-sponsored terrorism. In fact, that actually seemed to ramp up, and it also has a sunset provision. So I wouldn't have signed that deal. I would have continued with the sanctions. And I think that's what Trump thinks. I think Trump thinks maybe I can cut a deal with Iran, but we have to. I need to work my magic, call them Rocket Man, punish them more before they come to the table. In the case of North Korea, as we discussed last week, Bill, I'm very skeptical of what's going to happen here. And in fact, I fear that we could end up with a situation where American troops are pulled out, the North invades the South, and Donald Trump gets to sort of claim victory for 15 minutes of brokering peace, but in the long run, it works out really badly. Having said that, I think that there's a chance that this works out well. I mean, the optics of seeing hostages released were very good. I think any American's happy about that. I think that it is true that North Korea. I mean, when we find defectors and their bodies are riddled with worms and parasites, it makes you wonder how sturdy the regime is. We don't know how the effect that sanctions might have been having on North Korea, and whether Kim Jong-un actually feels threatened and feels like his regime is tenuous because of the state of the people. Also, I think that the madman theory of Donald Trump is possible. You know, I mean, I don't think I'd be afraid of Barack. If I was a 10, you know, I was one of these dictators, I don't think I would be afraid of Barack Obama. He didn't want to do it. You know, America had been chastened after Iraq. His whole, you know, he didn't want to go to war. But Trump,
though he did oust Gaddafi.
Yeah, true. I mean, fair. But I think with I would be more, honestly, I would be more afraid of Trump being that Trump might just fly off the handle and order something and kill me. So again, I'm you know, I'm not even cautiously optimistic, but I'm cautiously open-minded, is what I would say.
Well, again, I think it's very possible Trump strikes deal with North Korea. I don't know if it will be what conservatives would call a good deal. I'm sure it's not going to have a sunset type provision. It's just to be clear, as the Obama people always point out, the sunset provision is the sunset on the intrusiveness of the inspections. It doesn't say you may now have a nuclear weapon after 10 years. You're not supposed to have a nuclear weapon at all in the deal. It says you are not to have this. But the degree of inspections changes after that period of time, and so there's a question of can you trust them to stick with the deal after that point. And so I'm sure there won't be anything that is similar to that in a North Korea deal. But North Korea possesses more of a nuclear program than Iran did at the time of their deal. So how much does North Korea give up any kind of deal? That I'm less confident Trump's going to give him to really give up a lot of important stuff. I'm sure there'll be something to claim victory with. But I suspect that in Trump's mind, and it's hard for us to be mind readers, the Iran deal is bad because Obama did it. And any deal I do will be good because I did it. And there are certainly a lot of hardcore Trump fans who would follow along that logic and not bother themselves with the nitty-gritty of the details or worries about how trustworthy Kim Jong-un can be. I mean, Kim Jong-un is already, they're playing the most obvious game, which is let's flatter Trump to the heights so he'll do whatever we want. And Trump is saying nice things about Kim Jong-un. As opposed to I mean, Obama never talked this flowery about the Iranian regime in the course of their diplomacy. But you could argue, and look, I don't want to be a naysayer. I am all for saying things that may not be the most defensible if they help you grease the wheels for a peaceful deal. That is part of the nature of diplomacy. If being a jerk to your adversary isn't going to get you to a deal, don't be a jerk. But you could argue that you should be a jerk because of
and people. And by the way, as you know, Bill, people are being critical of Trump's comments about the release of the hostages. Mm-hmm. You know, where he said that they were treated well and said kind things about Kim. And people were saying, what are you talking about? Like, he shouldn't have taken these hostages to begin with. And now you're praising North Korea for letting go the people that they, you know, essentially kidnapped to begin with. By the way, I don't blame the victim here, but taking a job teaching at Pyongyang University may not be the best career decision for future reference, in my opinion.
Any visit to North Korea comes with inherent risk. I think that is obvious. But
I think so.
But there's some people that are taking the risk for high purpose. Some people are doing it just because it's interesting to visit. But obviously, whatever inherent risk you're taking doesn't justify becoming a prisoner and being treated horribly in captivity.
Yeah. No, I mean, other people have like sort of stumbled into North Korea, you know, accidentally and stuff like that. It's a little bit different. But I'm with you. I think that I
mean, certainly, if Obama talked that way about the Taliban, I mean, Obama did get hell from the right after Bo Bergdahl was released. When the Iranian prisoners were released in the midst of the Iranian deal, no one said, hooray for Obama, he got the visa. They said, those people should have been out a year before. You should have started negotiations until those people were out. I mean, again, Trump started these talks before these detainees came out. And no one's holding Trump to the same standard as the Obama folks do. I mean, so again, I'm not mad at Trump bringing detainees out. That's great.
I actually feel like Donald Trump, and this has nothing to do with substance, but that from a political standpoint, from an optics standpoint, that Trump is playing the game better. Like he's getting, and part of it is, I think part of it is probably still a built-in assumption that Republicans are tougher. Only Nixon goes to China. That Republicans are tougher in foreign policy. Some of it, I think, is Obama's sort of demeanor as sort of intellectual, academic, and Trump's macho alpha male thing. But I think some of it also is just the rollout. I just think that Trump has done a better job of selling the American public on this North Korea deal. And some of it's like showmanship, like, reality TV. But
I don't disagree with any of that. Yeah. But I should also add, Trump doesn't face a Democratic Party and a left willing to be that disingenuous. I mean, there might be some people who are grinding their teeth and nipping about this or that, but it's by no means the same kind of coordinated blast of criticism that Obama got every step of the way in the Iran deal, even when things worked out much better than conservatives thought they would, things like the release of hostages. They never would give Obama the tiniest shred of credit. So Trump never doesn't face that. People on the left say, no, all right, well, Trump did that. I'm going to give him that
right.
one.
Now, he has a different challenge, which is the relentless day in and day out Mueller scandal, Russia scandal.
Yes.
And so what he would call a witch hunt, and you and I would probably say that he's invited a lot of skepticism, if nothing else. But, I think that he probably, Democrats are probably more generous at giving him kind of grudging support for the foreign policy stuff. But simultaneously, they are trying to impeach him. So,
not yet.
Some of them are.
Let's shift gears a little bit. You wrote a very warm tribute to John McCain this week in the wake of the publicity rollout for his new book, The Restless Wave. Am I remembering the title correctly?
I don't remember. I saw that. I haven't read the book yet at all. I saw the document. There's a documentary that HBO is running over Memorial Day weekend that I got a sneak peek of, and it's quite good.
Yeah, the Restless Wave.
Okay.
Good Times, Just Causes, Great Fights, Other Appreciations, which he co-wrote with Mark Salter, my fellow Real Clear Politics contributor. So in the rollout of the book, I think it was the New York Times that reported that McCain has signaled that when he does have his funeral, he does not want Donald Trump at his funeral. And that prompted Orrin Hatch to snark back that McCain should be a bigger man and invite Trump, which then Hatch walked back and apologized after he got called up by Meghan McCain. This seemed to push some of your buttons.
I'm ready for Orrin Hatch to ride off into the sunset. But it wasn't just Orrin Hatch. It was people on the right and the left who they were upset about this. McCain snubbing Trump. I'm like, look, you can invite whoever the hell you want to your funeral. If there's ever a time when you could be like, I don't want this person there. This person, said that I wasn't a hero because heroes don't get captured. Like, I'm okay. Like, you have the right to say, like, I'd prefer Vice President Pence come instead.
Right.
But also some people were upset because McCain said that he regretted not picking his friend Joe Lieberman to be his running mate, and some people saw that as a snub on Palin. I think McCain was very careful not to criticize Palin.
Yeah, as he always has.
Yeah, as he always has. But some Palin fans were upset about that. Then I guess more recently there have been revelations that McCain writes about how he gave James Comey or talked to James Comey, informed James Comey about the Russia dossier. But I wrote a piece basically pushing back on the haters, the people who were like taking this opportunity. I mean, John McCain, not a perfect guy by any stretch. Some things he's done things I don't like, things that I don't agree with, but I do think he's an American hero, and he's struggling with brain cancer right now. And so for people on the left and the right to publicly attack him over this, it just kind of seemed a bit unseemly to me. So I wrote a piece about that.
I've had my own ups and downs with McCain. I don't know if I've said this on the show before. So I switched my party registration in 2000 to vote for McCain in the Republican primary.
I didn't know this about you.
At that point, I was in California at the time. It was at the end of the line. Gore, Brownlee had already dropped out. So there's nothing to vote for in the Democratic primary.
So you were on the Don Imus train where he endorsed Bill Bradley and John McCain.
Well, I was with Gore.
Oh, you were with Gore, okay.
And although I wasn't like gung ho for Gore, and I wasn't committed to voting for McCain in the general. I just thought I would much prefer a Gore McCain race than a Gore Bush race.
Right.
I had respect for McCain, and I had no respect for Bush. But you had to switch your party registration to vote in the primary, so I did for that 1 year. At that time, it was exciting. McCain, it was being on the left because he was for campaign finance reform. He was sticking it to Pat Robertson and the religious right.
Agents of intolerance.
This is before McCain's foreign policy became clearer to people. Now, McCain was quite critical of Bill Clinton's foreign policy at the time, calling it feckless and whatnot. I think people like me just weren't paying attention to that. I really didn't even understand what he was getting at. It seemed kind of random to me, and I didn't totally grasp. He was even talking about what was called rogue state rollback in 2000, and this is before the Iraq War, and the notion of sort of neoconservative foreign policy being this massive danger really just wasn't top of mind on the left. So I didn't think about it. And it was only after the Iraq War and seeing McCain be a cheerleader for that, which then prompted me, I think in the 2008 race, I forget exactly when I wrote it, I wrote a Huffington Post blog post calling McCain the most dangerous man in America because he still had some pull with the left in the middle, but was pushing this horrific foreign policy vision. Which he was even more committed to than George Bush was committed to. And then now, I feel I've sort of brought those two critiques of McCain, those two views of McCain together in my mind, where I bristle a little bit at folks on the left that say McCain's like a total phony and never really follow through on his reputation as a maverick. And I think there are plenty of cases where that is the case, where he did not follow through on his reputation as a maverick. But there are some cases where he did.
Yeah.
And you can't fully assess him without taking into account all of those details. I thought he was really spiteful towards Obama after 2008. He was for cap and trade in that race and then opposed it when Obama was president. I thought that was pretty low.
McCain also introduced a poison pill amendment to, stop McCain from doing immigration reform in the Bush years.
I'm not with you on that narrative.
And wasn't there the interview? Wasn't there the moment where there was a televised meeting where Obama turns to McCain and says it's over, I beat you, or I won, something like that.
I know there was the I won story. I didn't know if it was looking in McCain's eyes.
I seem to remember that, but anyway, we'll throw that open to the commenters to fact check my recollection of that. But anyway,
my point about McCain is that he is flawed.
Yes,
he's by no means perfect, and I think he would even tell you that he's let his emotions get in the way of his reason.
Well, the Confederate flag stuff is a prime example of where he did not he was not doing straight talk
Right.
in South Carolina. But then you got what they did to him down in South Carolina with the allegations that he was illegitimately fathered a black child with a prostitute or something. You know what I mean? So like the stuff that man had to endure, never mind the torture at the Hanoi Hilton, but just in his political life. It's a very complex guy and a very interesting story. And I think he always, like, I was totally against campaign finance reform, and I think that it is sort of indirectly led us to where we are today, where political parties are neutered and where we have a worse situation. I'm not saying there's a straight line, but things played out rather poorly over the last couple of decades. But I just think it's a great life. And this is a guy who tried to do the right thing, but sometimes failed.
I think sometimes he tried to do the right thing and failed. Sometimes I think he made bad judgment calls on the policy merits. Sometimes he ignored his own policy preferences to feed spiteful indulgences, and sometimes did the right thing. He's a complicated figure, and I think he should be judged in totality. And I think there are folks on the left and the right that want to reduce him based on some data points, not all the data points.
Well, what's really interesting is, I mean, how hated he is by a lot of conservatives. I mean, I got some emails, and
well, I mean, he called himself a Teddy Roosevelt Republican, which is not a libertarian Republican. You know, he's not a totally doctrinaire conservative, and I think the story of McCain is a story of somebody who I think had a clear philosophy, had certain views which he was very committed to, and certain things he was less committed to, but open-minded about, and therefore he kind of wavered on them. And the difficulty of walking that line in a world where people were trying to fit everybody into, you know, one of two sets of policy positions, and he did not always walk that line well. But that's the story of McCain, is how he tried to walk that line, and how hard it is to walk that line.
That's right. Well, we could talk a lot more about McCain, but might be a good place to tell people to follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show.
Check out my New Books in Politics podcast. I believe tomorrow the latest installment is going to be Stephen Strang, who wrote God and Donald Trump. You might remember Trump holding up that book at Davos. He runs Charisma Media, which is a charismatic conservative media site, part of the Pentecostal strain. And this is a book from a Trump supporter explaining why is it that evangelicals, Pentecostals, charismatics have been so loyal to Trump. So I explore that.
Was he a hostile Pentecostal?
What do you mean by that?
I'm just teasing. I used to work on a campaign with a guy who defined himself as a hostile Pentecostal.
He did not describe himself that way to me. But that should be uploaded tomorrow. And I got two more fun ones coming up next week that I won't reveal yet.
So I just interviewed Selena Zito, who has a new book out. And it's super interesting because we talked about how she really reported the 2016 campaign totally different. She refuses to fly. She doesn't fly in airplanes. She doesn't take highways. She just drives. She would if Trump was having a rally, she'd get there 2 or 3 days early, check into a bed and breakfast, go to a gun range, go to church with locals, go to soccer games, kids' soccer games, and ended up being, basically much more in tune with Pennsylvania, where she lives in Pittsburgh. I think that's a big help to her as well. And she was literally unemployed after the election. She had done this great reporting. She's, much more correct than most in the media and her analysis. And she she found herself basically unemployed on election day. She'd gotten an interview with Trump and had nowhere to publish it, the interview. And that's where the line came from about taking him literally and not seriously. And she tried to get the New York Times to publish it. They wouldn't. She tried to get the Washington Post to. She finally got the Atlantic to publish it. And right after the election, she was on her way to a job interview at a bakery. And she got a call from CNN offering her a job. It's a great story, so check out that podcast. Just look for Matt Lewis in the News. And if you want to support, and thank you, I heard from at least one DMZ listener or fan who is contributing to my Patreon. But I just launched this Patreon page. It's a way for, if you want to support long forms, smart content, and help us keep the lights on, go to patreon.com/Matt Lewis or whatever, Matt Lewis /Patreon. I forget. I think it's Patreon/Matt Lewis. But for as little as $1 a month, it'll be a big help. I just launched it, I think a week ago, Bill. We talked about it here, but I'm trying to get to 100 patrons. So this is a way, right, for there's different models of how can people, I've been doing the podcast for almost a decade, Bill, as you know, and I've lost money doing it. I've gained a lot of other, intangibles, but I've lost money doing it. But there's the subscription model where people have to pay to listen or read you. I don't think that really works. There's the advertising model, which I'm not against, but that has pros and cons as well. But this harkens back to the olden days where, patrons would actually sponsor an artist or a philosopher or a writer and help them basically focus on what they're doing. And I think something like a podcast, which by definition isn't sexy, isn't glamorous, doesn't get a ton of, very few podcasts go viral. This may be the model. So I'm really experimenting with it. And if you like what I do with the podcast, check it out.
All right.
All right, Bill.
Till next week, sir.
Thanks, man.
Take care.
Yeah.